It's time to begin our Bible study. We invite you to our new study this evening. We begin the study of the Song of Solomon. I don't know if you've ever studied this in a class setting. You may have, I think before the COVID hit, things happened. The ladies were studying Song of Solomon. They never finished, and hopefully we'll finish. There's 6 lessons, and it's a short book, and it's a challenge to want to study the Bible in the sense I want to know exactly what God says, not what other people have interpreted it to be. When you open up the commentary by Moses E. Lord in 1865, he wanted to write a commentary on Romans, and he knew it was going to be a big job to do, but by 1870 something he had it done, and he's now writing about his thoughts. But he didn't want to be on the side of Calvinism, nor did he want to be on the other side, which would be other people that just are totally against Calvinism. And he wanted to know exactly, wasn't trying to favor two opposites of one another that have fought over the book of Romans, but he wanted to just find out exactly the train of thought that the Holy Spirit is directing its readers. And I offer that challenge to you. And we're going to look at 2 primary ways of interpreting the Song of Solomon. But even if we talk about figurative language, in order to understand the figure and get into the depth of figure, we need to know exactly the literal part of that. If it's figurative and it can't be literal, it has to be figurative. But we first establish what? It means exactly what it says. It's dealing with exactly the context that it's dealing with. And we read of graphic things, and we say, well, I don't want to study that. And yet I want to understand it's in our Bibles. Solomon indeed is a writer of 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. And what does the first verse of your Bible say? What does it say about this book? Does it say it's the Song of Solomon? No, that's what we say. It's as you said, it's the Song of Songs. And so what we began to realize from the very beginning, it's a song of songs, and we're talking about something superlative. I mean, you might look at all of his songs that he wrote, 1,005. This surpasses them all. It is the best one that he has set forth, or the most important. And I think probably the latter was important to his life when you think about his practice of polygamy. Because when you look at the details of this song, I remember going to high school and learning, trying to be, I had a teacher that took us all on Sunday afternoons to see operas, on Sunday afternoon operas, or go see Shakespeare plays, kind of get us culture there in Fort Worth. And I remember going to those things, and I remember reading Shakespeare in high school, and I would know, here's the actor, here's the person that's speaking, and here's another person that's speaking. Well, I would know that from the plays and so forth, but who's speaking in Song of Solomon? You're going to have to figure that one out, aren't you? My Bible doesn't say the Shulamite. This is Solomon speaking. This is the shepherd boys speaking. These are the daughters of Jerusalem speaking. And yet the characters are there. It is a song. It could be made an opera. It's been made a play. And it lends itself to this, but we want to understand what the meaning is. And how God has just written this. Solomon wrote it. He's inspired to write it. And it sets forth, has a meaning. Let's just grasp the meaning. I don't care where it leads us. That we can establish that that's what he's talking about. Now, I may need to move from that, and how do I apply that? We'll deal with that. But our challenge is to understand what God is saying, and does it have meaning of reality that I can hold on to. But this is the best of his songs. I think it's the most important of his songs. As I said in 1 Kings 4:32, Solomon wrote over 1,000 songs. How many proverbs did he write? That same passage says 3,000 proverbs. Do we have some proverbs of Solomon in our Bibles? Inspired of God, and we'll study the proverbs. You just look at the first 10 chapters, they're full of Solomon's proverbs. We study that. We want our young people to study that. But you stay out of Song of Solomon. A little too graphic for you, really. And we've got to have our mind mature to understand. I want to know exactly what God is saying, and I need to understand the contents of that. And there's a great lesson for young people in this Song of Songs of Solomon. So it is indeed one of the most important, if not the most important. The more common title is what we call it, what I have here. We're going to study the Song of Solomon. We only have one. We're going to study it, but it's the Song of Songs. It's the Songs of Solomon. It's kind of the superlative aspect. Why? And we want to see, why was it so important that God would preserve this among all of his songs? Why he would preserve this in his Bible. And it has a lot to do with how we interpret it. But that's a challenge between you and me. I'm directing this, but I surely can be wrong, because I'm trying to do what Moses Lawyer was trying to do, and as I try to do with all the scriptures. I want to know for myself. I can read English, and I can respect context. I don't need to be a Greek scholar to know the application of a passage. And when it contradicts my thinking, I need to back up and realize I've got something else going, that I may be seeing this in the wrong way. And I don't depend on what other people have to say until I just need help. And then I can see, I've already known the context. Are they fudging on that? You're able to know something before you even contact what someone else has to say. So don't accept my outline for it. This is... Sometimes I'm trying, is that exactly what he was going at? How do I know that person's speaking there? Well, it's got we and it's got me. I, they, we. That helps me understand there's somebody different talking. And we do that in the Psalms. There's parts of the Psalms that he's speaking to God. Sometimes God's speaking to him. And sometimes I'm speaking to God. We make those adjustments. But we want to study the Song of Solomon in that same light. Canticles is a modern theological word that we'll find in religious people. All it means is a series of songs. We look at it that way, or especially a song that we're saying. So this could be sung. It was something that would be sung at the different feast days of the Jews, and we'll see it in just a few moments. Solomon is the author of the book. After all, it's a Song of Solomon, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. He owns it. He's the author of it. He introduces himself. So I'm going to accept that. God's word is true till somebody says for why it contradicts reality. But this is his song. And notice how he describes in the third person. He doesn't say me. He just says Solomon. And we're seeing in chapter 1 and verse 1, it belongs to Solomon. We look at verse 5. When he says the curtains of Solomon, they're talking about the darkness of things. And it's like the curtains of Solomon that you can remind of where his palace is. Chapter 3 and verse 7. It is indeed speaking of Solomon in a sense. Behold, it is the litter of Solomon. See the graphic language or figurative language? Did he really have a bunch of puppies running around him? A bunch of dogs, litter? David, we're not answering it yet, but go ahead. The what? Okay. Well, I'm trying to create interest. Thank you for clearing that up. Well, I do too. And the context will demand I have to realize it's not dogs. And I don't have to know Greek or Hebrew. I know the context. That helps so much. But thank you for that. That's very true. But it belongs to Solomon. Verse 9, King Solomon made himself a palanquin that he made himself. And all of a sudden we see, who's riding that one? And here's somebody's going to decorate it. Who's that going to be? Are they talking about it? Yeah. Get yourself into the play. Get yourself into the song. And you figure out who's doing what. And it helps you understand these things. But it's King Solomon. So it's when he's king, this is being talked about. Verse 11, chapter 3, go forth, O you daughters of Zion, and behold King Solomon. O you daughters of Zion, you go forth and meet Solomon. So we have introduced here another group of ladies. And do they have a part in this? They do. But again, we're focusing on, it is indeed Solomon. And then just chapter 8 at the end, verse 11 is still Solomon. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. So he had a vineyard. He is king. He has great possessions, armies, strong men guarding him and so forth. And verse 12, my vineyard is mine. Before me, O Solomon, shalt have 1,000, and those that keep the fruit thereof 200. And we'll see how that means. But Solomon, the author, he's all through this speaking of himself in the third person. Anybody ever talks in the third person? Yeah, crazy people do. No, inspired people do when they're writing a book. Sometimes John didn't even mention his name, and we realize, well, it's probably John, the Apostle John that wrote the book. But a lot of times the Bible speaks to this. And Solomon is speaking about himself and the things that happened in his mind or in his life that it's worth talking about. Remember, it is the Song of Songs that belonged to Solomon. Solomon probably wrote this book in the early part of his reign. He got a 40-year span. And the reason I would say that indeed it's a possibility, is because how many wives and concubines he had at the time when he writes this. What does the Song of Solomon say? We want to see what it says. In chapter 6 and verse 8, he says, these are 80 queens and 80 concubines. So there are that many queens and that many concubines. We know from 1 Kings 11 and verse 3, how many wives did he have, which we would equate maybe to queens? How many wives did he have? 700. Well, that's a little bit more than 60. But it shows a progress that Solomon had as he reigned, as he got older. And he had, how many concubines did he have in 1 Kings 11 and verse 3? He had 80. He'd end up with, have 300. And so there's an indication that it did, it had to start with 1, had to start with 5 or 10. But here's a point, we know from 1 Kings that he would have that many. But at this particular time, he had this many. Did those decrease? Or was it increasing? I think it increased over time as he would leave the wisdom of God, as he started out very well, but those wives would take him away into serving idolatry. We know that background, and so we look at if he wrote it early in his reign, we're looking at 960 to 950 BC when he wrote this, if that's the kind of beginning of his reign. And so that would be like if he comes in at 970, so about 10 years after that, he has this amount. It would increase until the 930s. And so that's one area of just saying, well, if you're going to put a date on it, and yet we can't put a date on it and be precise, but we know he's king, he's got wives, he's got concubines, he's after a virgin, and the Bible says there were virgins without number. And the Shulamite girl is just one of them that he's interested in. And he's writing the book. It's his story. But he's writing by inspiration of this taking place. And so we were trying to understand this. So that would be one aspect of being our early date. But let's think about it another way. Wonder if he's looking back to the 960s. He's looking back as he becomes an older man at the end of his reign. And he looks back with regret because he's learned a lesson now that he's writing about. Are you going to get that message? I hope so. I mean, he's going to ring it in your ear 3 different times in this song. The refrain is there. You're not going to miss it. It's like singing a chorus. Every time you sing a verse, you're going to have a chorus, a chorus, a chorus. And it's going to ring in your ears. And if you follow that, we'll talk about it in a few moments, there's a sense of maybe he was looking with regret and wrote this at the end of his reign, regretting that he had not followed the wisdom of God and learned a lesson about love, about marital love. And how do we see it in the New Testament? God says you have your own husband, you have your own wife. There's that sexual relationship that's off limits to everyone else. And that's the way God, when he brought in his complete perfect will under the New Testament, that's what he demands of us. Solomon was practicing polygamy. And he had a lot of wives, a lot of concubines, virgins without number. And he could be looking back. But what time frame are we talking about? We're looking at 20, 30 years, 3 decades. But I think that has a valid point to consider about the date, early or maybe late. Any comments on that? Questions you might have? I don't have God saying this happened in 965 or 970 BC. We have to try to figure it out. But some internal evidence makes you realize this is probably, he had to write it when he was king. He's dead after that. And so we're limited. When could he have written this? All right. Relationship with other books. And we have our English Bibles. And we have this designated as we try to divide the scriptures, with the 66 books of the Bible, 39, 27. Well, here's the 39. But there are sections in these 39s. There's the Pentateuch, 5 books of law. And we've just got through with one of those books, Leviticus. And aren't you glad we're not going into Numbers? Thank you. You're welcome. We need to study Song of Solomon. Then we're going to study Job. And then we're going to get to Numbers. And then we're going to go to Jeremiah and Ezekiel. We're going to hit those prophets. That's kind of what's in store for us if the Lord allows us to keep going. But right now we're taking a journey into the days of Solomon. In our English Bibles, what are these 5 books of wisdom? We got the book of Job, and we'll study that book. We got the Psalms. We got Proverbs. We got Ecclesiastes. What's the 5th one? Of course, you have Lamentations, as we'll see in another way of looking at the book. But those are books of wisdom. Song of Solomon is part of the books of wisdom, and it has some wisdom to offer. And people understood that from very early on. It has a message, and it deserves to be studied because God has revealed it. And we should not try to avoid that. Look at your Song of Solomon, chapter 4, and verse 15. Thou art a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and flowing streams from Lebanon. Well, does Proverbs speak about love in this way of a fountain and so forth? Look at Proverbs 5:15, probably the Proverbs of Solomon. Chapter 5 and verse 15, drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well. Should thy springs be dispersed abroad and streams in the streets? Well, what's that the context of in Proverbs It's about the sexual relationship. Don't share that with others. You have the water out of your own cistern. Don't spread that to the streets. It's a vivid picture of that relationship that is between a husband and a wife, and that should be honored. Well, he speaks about thou art a fountain of gardens, as talk about one's beloved in that context. In that same sense, of Song of Solomon 4 in verse 15, he says, the moving streams from Lebanon, thou art a fountain of gardens. Look at Proverbs 7 in verse 17. He speaks about the jealousy of that. Well, this is not talking about that. We'll get that in a minute. But my perfume, my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. And so here was the fountain of gardens, flowing streams from Lebanon, well of waters. Verse 14, there's the spikenard, that's the verse I'm after, saffron, calamus, cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense. There's the smell of the gardens. It's talking about the love that's there. So some of the Proverbs has the same imagery that we see being set forth in Song of Solomon, appealing to the senses, the smell, and those things are involved there. Look at Song of Solomon 8, verses 6 and 7. This is where I got ahead of myself. But hast set me as a seal upon thy heart, as a seal upon thine arm. For love is strong as what? As death. Jealousy as cruel as the grave, Sheol. The flashes thereof are flashes of fire, a very flame of Jehovah. Jehovah has placed this within us, and there is indeed the jealous heart, and the relationship that is supposed to be exclusively for one is not to be shared with others. So we see that spoken about by Solomon in Proverbs the 6th chapter. In verse 30, we find it brought forth. He says, men do not despise a thief if he steal, to satisfy himself when he's hungry, but he's still going to be found guilty. As he's found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. He that committeth adultery with a woman is void of understanding. He doeth it who would destroy his own soul. Wounds and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man, and he will not spare in the day of vengeance. Probably shoot both of you in bed. That's the way the movies put it. But they're hitting at a feeling that is real, strong, it always has been. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts. That sexual relationship, special, private, belongs one man, one woman. That's how we find it brought forth in the New Testament. Well, what's Solomon doing? He got many wives, many concubines, virgins without number. What lessons is he learning? What lessons do we see? It's what is consistent with the books of wisdom. And the Song of Solomon is just another one of those books. And that's important. Let's see what it's like in the Hebrew Bible. How you like these 5 rows? Megillah is how the Hebrews was described it. You got Song of Solomon, you got Ruth, you got Lamentations. Who wrote Lamentations? Jeremiah, after the destruction of Jerusalem in his day. You got Ecclesiastes. Well, that's a book of wisdom. That's in our English Bibles. You got Esther. So you got Ruth and Esther, and it's emphasizing 5 roles. Here were 5 books that were placed together: Song of Solomon, Ruth, Esther, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes. And it's hard for us in our English Bible. What groupings are that? Well, the Hebrew had their own grouping of their Bible, their roles. It was a 5-roll book that had all of these particular books upon it. And that was part of the Hebrew Bible that we had. But it is in our Bible in the books of wisdom, which I think fits very well. Portions of it was sung on the 8th day of the Passover feast, as we that they would remember that Song of Solomon. However, when we look at, when we look at the, all right, thank you, it's not directly referred to by Christ in the New Testament. He doesn't refer to the Song of Solomon. And so that kind of says, well, does that mean it doesn't belong? And we're going to be looking at that. But he doesn't refer to it like the New Testament does refer to Psalm 45 and verse 6. Thy throne, O God, is forever, ever. It's in the context of the wedding ceremony of a king. And Hebrews 1, 8, and 9 refers to that. And so we know that does have a connection. But there's nothing about the Song of Solomon that Jesus refers to that should help us try to understand the meaning of it. Main characters. King Solomon is definitely one. We see in 1 Kings 1, 32 through 37 that he was indeed king. And we won't look at all of the things, but he describes how he looks upon the Shulamite woman in chapter 1, verses 9 through 8. So we'll be looking first part of chapter 9. As he describes her, he's ravished by her beauty, and he wants him part of his harem. And so we see he's one of the characters. He's the one, he's the king, he has the power, he has the prestige, and daughters of Jerusalem like him. Who wouldn't? That's Solomon. And so there's that part of it that might attract people. But this Shulamite woman, there's something different about her. She's from Shunem and speaks about this in the Song of Solomon. Notice it says, describing her, return, O Shulamite. If you have the King James, you got one M for Shulamite. Got the American Standard. A lot of other versions, you have two M's. But it was from the area of Shunem, and if we have time, we're going to be looking at a map. And we're not making up places for this song that doesn't exist. I mean, it's map. It's right there in the area where Solomon ruled. These are real places. She's from Shunem. She's called a Shulamite woman. And we see that there was some other Shulamite woman like Abishag who sat at the feet of King David and warmed his feet when he got to be an old man. She was a Shulamite. But here's this woman, unnamed. Don't know, we have them named with David, Abishag. But we don't have this one. But it's the Shulamite woman. She is a principal character. We see a lot about her thinking. But there's introduced a shepherd lover. And this is the Shulamite's true love. I'm already interpreting it. You don't have to go there, but I am. This is where I think it's directing us. And I got one passage right after another. She'll call him my beloved, my love, my beloved. In chapter 1 and verse 16, she says, behold, thou art fair, my beloved. And I think that's him replying back to her. So it's going, and our couch is green. He's referring back to her. For she says in verse 15, behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair, thine eyes are as doves. Behold, thou art fair, my beloved, you pleasant. Our couch is green. Come back where I'm shepherd and the plains of Sharon. Come with me. Don't go, don't be with King Solomon and all of his glory. Our couch is green because they live in the land and their bedding is green. It's not like a palace that they have. But all through here is that he is on her mind, and as we try to find what meaning it is, I have to realize there's this relationship that they're having, and King Solomon is out here too. And he's ravished by her. But this is where her heart lies. This is what I'm driven to least know, and you can't escape it. How you interpret that, well, that's Christ in the church. That's up to you. But at the first level, it is that attraction, the physical attraction, the physical relationship, that is being set forth. And I think we can see that. Then there's the daughters of Jerusalem. I mentioned them. And so it's a plurality. We. It's a plurality of these women. And chapter 1 and verse 4, here's where it's what I'm talking about. Verse 4 said, Draw me, we will return after thee. The king hath brought me unto his chambers. We'll be glad to rejoice in thee. Well, draw me. He's brought me. We will be glad and rejoice in thee. We will make mention of thy love more than of wine. Rightly do they love thee. And so here are those, and this is perfect when she's making statements, when she's having her dreams, she kind of expresses to the daughters of Jerusalem, and they're right with her. They love her. They think that she's special. But these are the daughters, maybe they're attendants of the king's palace. They're companions of the bride, or they're interested onlookers. But all through this book, she is setting forth this. Now, here's what we'll see as she speaks to them. Now, remember, if you realize they're attendants of the king's palace, and this is the first time we see a refrain. And so I don't want the time to go without stating this. Look at chapter 2 and verse 7. I adjure you, who is she talking to? Daughters of Jerusalem. That's why I'm bringing it up. She's talking to them. She's not part of them. She's in their presence. They're in her presence. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes or by the hinds of the field. You get that picture of the activity and of hopping deer and that kind of animal. I adjure you by them that you stir not up nor awake my love until what? Until he please. And someone said, well, until it pleases. Solomon is trying to wake her love. She doesn't follow suit. She has her heart set upon a shepherd boy. And that's the drama. That if he's, well, there's no drama going on. There's not any back and forth. Yeah, it's full of it. And if you don't acknowledge that, then how do you have a grasp upon what does it mean? But that fits. Thank you. That fits with that, and she'll stress that she's talking to them, and they're saying, "Oh, this is wonderful. We're going you're going to be real pretty and presented unto King Solomon, their wedding and all that sort of thing." But I adjure you, you do not wake love until that. It's like the deer and the animal over the mountains of love. That's you don't force that, and that's very important. And physical love or the natural love. David, you had your hand up. Okay. So we're interpreting this as say a human love story. That's where I'm heading. At least you'll understand that's what we're talking about first. And King Solomon cannot force her to love him. I think it's an indictment against Solomon's polygamy, because he could have any woman he wanted to, but he couldn't have her. He couldn't have her heart. That's what he wanted. And so I think that's really the theme and the point of this, why this stands out as Solomon. God wants it there. It is an indictment against him going against God's wisdom. And Solomon will write it as he's guided by God. It's a refrain that's repeated 3 times in the book. And that's chapter 3 and verse 5 in your change notes. I bought a corrected copy. You'll have 3:5 there instead of 3:6. But it says the same thing. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, don't stir up nor wake my love until he pleases. It comes at the end of the book, chapter 8 and verse 4. I adjure you. It's like making a solemn oath. You understand it? This is a solemn oath, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you stir not up. Don't you ever do this. You swear you won't do that. And at the end, said, we've got a sister. She has no breast. What are we going to do with her when she becomes of age? And I hope they'll learn the lesson. You don't force it. And as it's been forced on me until he pleases. But that's not the way the Song of Solomon has been interpreted by religious people in general. And commentaries have been written saying, well, all right, that may be out there, but what it's really talking about is the type. It's showing that the church is the bride. And we've got the marriage ceremony. We've got that relationship with the bride and her husband, which is indeed Jesus Christ. What does the book of Revelation lead you there? It definitely tells you that we're speaking about the church. It speaks about has her letting the clothes that she has are the works, the holy works, the sanctified works of the people that belong to the church. It's very much definitely stating that relationship. And Psalm 45 is a great one because it has a statement in the context of a wedding ceremony where indeed it's honoring the king, and it's thy throne, O God, that he's talking about. It's not the marriage ceremony, but thy throne, O God, is emphasized, and that's what the Hebrew writer will say. But Jesus never refers to himself as the Rose of Sharon. Do we have a song in our songbook like that? Yes, we sing it. Well, if you take the naturalistic view, can you sing that song anymore? Why not? Psalm 45 has a figurative aspect. I can look at that's natural love, and that's not the type of love I need to have for my Lord. But that song, when you realize that, it's a shepherd boy coming out of the plain of Sharon. Jesus didn't come out of the plain of Sharon. That's on the Philistine side. That's land of Canaan. We know where he came from. But it's a sense of having this love for that shepherd. And he just took that imagery and made a song where he said that glory be seen throughout the earth until your power is set forth. And maybe he got that, well, she's serving Solomon. And that's who it is. That could very well be. But whoever wrote that may have thought about that because that's the way a lot of interpretation has been, that Jesus is indeed the husband in the church, and this is talking about the church. And then you're going to interpret everything that way, where you realize, I know it says this, but it's just speaking about the love that the church ought to have for Jesus and Jesus has for the church. And we know how God interprets that in the New Testament, but it's not graphic as we see here. And when I say graphic, it doesn't mean it's dirty. And we don't want to think of it that way. But that's why it's sometimes, well, this is so much, we're gonna make it figurative. We don't want to deal with reality too much. That's figurative, and that we can look on a high level of the love that we ought to have for Jesus. And that's fine. And that song is just exalting Jesus. But it's coming from the Song of Solomon. But we don't have anything from the New Testament that would say this is fulfilling Song of Solomon. But what it is indictment against, I think, polygamy. And the refrain, just you gotta ignore something if you're gonna miss that. And we don't want to miss that. So we're gonna interpret it that way, and we'll do so in a good way. I know you can't see all the places, but it's the best one I could get. This course, whoever did this one, I know him. He took an early date of writing the book, or took a later date of Solomon writing that book. But you see different places. Bethar will be talked about. Heshbon will be talked about. Tirzah will be talked about. Shunem. Those are real places. She's a Shulamite. She comes from there. You have Plain of Sharon. That's on this coast. Tyre, Sidon. That's a fertile plain. That's where they would look after a lot of sheep. That's where the shepherd boy is coming from, as the Rose of Sharon. And but real places that were involved. It wasn't a made-up story that indeed these places never existed, but they are put in a context where they may describe one's beloved. And we want to figure out in what way is that described that way. If you call your wife, you're just like a steed of Pharaoh's horses, chariots. I don't know if that'd be a compliment to your wife today, but it was a compliment to this lady. And we're going to say, well, why would it be? And we'll talk about that. You have any questions? Our time is up. You have any questions before we close tonight about that? Those are two broad ways of interpreting. There's also variables of all of that we have, but I think these are the two main ones. And let you know, we're going to go the naturalistic view first. At least we'll have that nailed down. If you want to go figurative on me, give me a good reason, and we'll talk about that. Okay, thank you very much for being here and participating.